there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. One man, one microphone, one mission, one message. True News, the only newscast reporting the countdown to the second coming of Jesus Christ. And now for the most powerful hour on radio, here is End Time Newsman, Rick Wiles.
This is True News, 1 hour of uncensored news, views, and commentary. Welcome to the program. I'm Rick Wiles. Today is Monday, March 16, 2015. The world is breathing easier today now that Vladimir Putin has been found. The 62-year-old Russian president has not been seen in public for 11 days. The internet was rife with rumors that he had died or was extremely ill or had been overthrown, even celebrating the birth of his love child. A grinning Mr. Putin said today that the world would be boring without gossip. A more sobering report from Moscow, however, was Mr. Putin's statement during a TV documentary in which he confirmed that he was prepared for a nuclear war with NATO over the Crimean Peninsula. Speaking on Russian state television, Mr. Putin said he was prepared to face the worst possible turn of events in the Crimea. Asked whether he was ready to put Russia's nuclear forces on alert, Mr. Putin said, quote, "We were ready to do this," end of quote. As the West intensifies its sanctions against Russia over Ukraine, Russia has responded with aggressive nuclear bomber patrols near the airspace of the United States, Canada, Great Britain, and some Scandinavian countries. With Mr. Putin back in his Kremlin seat today, he ordered 40,000 Russian soldiers in northern and western Russia to be put on full alert early today as part of an unannounced SNAP exercise to test combat readiness in the Arctic. The exercises involve Russia's northern fleet as well as airborne and other troops in western Russia. Meanwhile, 80,000 soldiers and 20,000 civilians are participating in a massive air defense and artillery drill in Venezuela. There are South American reports saying that Russian and Chinese military advisors are on the ground participating in the war exercise. Venezuelan troops will be using Chinese amphibian weapons and Russian missiles and artillery. What spooked Venezuela to prepare for war? Barack Obama recently declared Venezuela as an unusual and extraordinary threat to America's national security. And what spooked Barack Obama to declare Venezuela a national security threat? The Latin American socialist nation has allowed Russian strategic nuclear bombers to land and refuel at its military air bases. Russia is also negotiating with Venezuela to build air force and naval bases in that country. The world has entered a historic war cycle. Are we on the verge of World War III? If yes, will it be nuclear? My guest doesn't believe World War III will culminate in a nuclear holocaust, but he does see the serious possibility that it may be fought asymmetrically. Many of our listeners are subscribers to his company's financial research and or newsletters such as Money and Markets and Uncommon Wisdom Daily. Dr. Martin Weiss founded Weiss Research in 1971. He is also the president of Weiss Ratings, America's leading independent rating agency. And he is the chairman of the Sound Dollar Committee, originally founded by his father in 1959 to help President Dwight Eisenhower balance the U.S. budget. Dr. Weiss's most recent book is The Ultimate Money Guide for Bubbles, Busts, Recessions, and Depression. Well, Dr. Weiss, welcome to True News.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. I read your commentary on moneyandmarkets.com, World War III, how, where, and why. Why are you confident, or at least hopeful, that World War III will not involve nuclear weapons?
I think we have to get that issue off the table before we can start talking about World War III, because I don't know about you, but when anyone comes to me and says we're going to have another world war, that's the first thing that pops into my mind. And that can cloud your thinking tremendously. We didn't have a nuclear confrontation during the Cold War of the 20th century for very strong reasons, because there was an assurance, almost a total understanding that a World War III or a Cold War, a hot war with nuclear bombs would assure the mutual self-destruction of both sides. And that is what was the underlying every single time that either the West or the East backed down from a direct confrontation. I mean, the Russians tanks invaded Budapest, and they invaded again in Czech Republic. Now it was at the time before Czechoslovakia, and the United States, the West, did not lift a finger to combat that, because it was clear that that was their turf, essentially, and it was also clear that if there was a direct confrontation between the Soviet Union and the United States, it would be the end for everyone. And again, in the Cuban Missile Crisis, in this time, it was the Soviet Union that backed down, and again for the same reason. Today, the mutual interdependence between Russia and the former Soviet states is far greater than it was back then. So, if anything, the likelihood of a nuclear confrontation today is greatly reduced. And even some of the nutty folks, such as in North Korea, have a fundamental understanding that they would not survive. They just would not survive it. It's all about brinkmanship and then pulling back from the brink.
Now, Pope Francis said in September 2014 that World War III had actually already started. Was he correct?
He was correct, but it's not the kind of World War III we were just talking about. What he was talking about is a combination of crimes, the kind of crimes we've seen, for example, committed by ISIS, massacres, destruction on a local level, civil wars, proxy wars, cyber wars, economic wars. That's what World War III is beginning to shape up to look like. And, I think it'd be interesting to talk about each one of those. For example, economic wars have already been declared. We've seen that in between Russia and the United States. I mean, the Russians already have limited access to foreign markets and capital because of the sanctions. The Russian ruble has already lost half of its value because of the sanctions and other factors. The Russian economy is already suffering, and if this continues to escalate, you could see Russian banks excluded from the global payment system. You could see the Russians retaliate by cutting off oil and gas supplies to Europe, and you could see the Russian economy fall even further, which, by the way, is not good for us. We, as Western investors, have a lot of money. Our corporations have a lot of money invested in Russia. And so it's bad for everyone when that happens. We also have we have proxy wars. When I say proxy wars, I'm talking about civil wars on a local level where each side uses the combatants as kind of a proxy for fighting a war, but never confronts the other directly on the battlefield. You remember the Vietnam War. That was a classic example of a proxy war where the United States was involved heavily with its troops. I mean, over the 11-year period, we had 2.7 million U.S. troops serving on the ground in South Vietnam. At that time, the Russians were the biggest suppliers to North Vietnam of weapons. So we were fighting Russia on a proxy level. Opposite happened. The same thing happened when the Russians invaded Afghanistan in December of 1979. They had their troops on the ground, but we were supplying their enemies with weapons and logistic support. But never during the entire 20th century was there a significant confrontation directly between the two powers. And that's the type of thing we're going to see here today.
Dr. Weiss, you mentioned the economic sanctions on Russia. Historically, aren't economic sanctions considered acts of war?
Sometimes they are.
I mean, let's think about pre-Pearl Harbor. The U.S. put sanctions on Japan. Japan responded by bombing Pearl Harbor.
Correct. So it depends on the interpretation. They'll call it what they want to call it. And sometimes they'll avoid calling it an act of war because they don't want it to escalate the tensions. And sometimes they'll call it an act of war as an excuse for retaliating with another act. So in the case of the pre-World War II economic actions, they had already made up their mind that they're going to bomb Pearl Harbor, and so they used that as a justification. Today, I don't think either side has made up their mind about anything, and so they're seeking to avoid. I mean, look how the Obama administration bent over backwards to avoid the word invade or attack with respect to Russian troops in the Ukraine. And look how Putin, despite everything he says, just in his latest interview, for example, keeps referring to the United States as our good friends and partners. I mean, you don't see that this is going to escalate to a direct confrontation, but we are seeing an escalation on the economic plane. We are seeing an escalation in terms of the proxy wars I mentioned a moment ago. And the third and perhaps most concerning level of confrontation is cyber wars.
Before we get there, sir, I want to ask you one more question regarding the economic sanctions. The U.S. and the European Union are currently openly discussing kicking Russia out of the SWIFT bank wire network. Now, a SWIFT cutoff would strangle Russia. How do you expect Russia to respond to such an extreme action?
With cutting off the oil and gas supplies to Western Europe.
So they will retaliate by cutting off all the natural gas going into Europe.
Right. Well, I don't know if they cut all of it off. But yes, what seems to be taking place is that each of these kinds of wars is kind of at this point in time segregated into a separate box.
But at what point does this thing erupt into an old-fashioned barroom fistfight?
You mean an all-out battle between the United States and...
Yeah, I mean, if we cut off the banking system in Russia, that they can't get any money in and out, and then they cut off the natural gas to Europe, and Europe is freezing. I mean, these are acts of war. I mean, this isn't just calling your mother a name. I mean, this is like really punching you in the lips.
Well, first of all, if it happens, okay, then let's ask. Then you will have to see then. But we're basing a forecast on a forecast.
Mm-hmm.
So we're forecasting that the economic sanctions and the economic actions by the West are going to be escalated, and then we're forecasting what the retaliation is going to be, and then we're seeking to forecast what the next step is going to be after that.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm telling you right now is that each of these kinds of wars is at this point in time contained in a separate box. So economic aggression is being responded to with other economic measures. Cyber war is being responded to on the cyber level. And the proxy wars, which is the third level of this, is being again localized to those to the proxy. To those local disputes. Mm-hmm. We have not yet seen one of these categories kind of trigger another in a big way. So it's too soon to anticipate an all-out war. And I don't think that's going to happen because it would be mutually self-destructive.
All right. Now you mentioned cyber war.
It's going to get worse. It's going to get worse,
mm-hmm.
but it's not going to get worse to the point of a nuclear holocaust.
But it's going to ramp up.
It's going to ramp up
incrementally. What are some of the asymmetrical warfare strategies that Russia and or China could use against the USA? You mentioned cyber war. Let's talk about that one.
Well, let's first recognize that the United States was the one essentially was the first in this cyber warfare arena with its attacks on Iran.
Mm-hmm.
And then Iran retaliated. And now we have, it's been an open sesame. Now you have China and Russia and North Korea mounting serious attacks on the United States.
Do you remember last year, Homeland Security said that there is a Russian version of Stuxnet that has been placed on U.S. infrastructure like dams, power stations, and so forth. That story appeared for about a day or two, but they said it's been there for it's been on our infrastructure computer systems for about 2 years. Now, that says that they've penetrated the systems, and at their leisure, they can activate these Trojan horses that are inside our systems.
If this is, to me, and to anyone who understands the Internet in depth, the most concerning kind of warfare, because it's so easy. It doesn't require much of an investment, and it doesn't come with all the collateral destruction that you see in physical warfare. But it can be extremely damaging to the other's economy and ability to act on virtually every level. So this is the most concerning. And what is also concerning is that most of the R&D, most of the manpower and brain power is going into the offensive side. And a lot more needs to be invested on the defensive side, especially here in the United States. I think that's beginning to change, but they have a long way to go.
From your perspective as a financial consultant, are you a researcher? What are you hearing in the banking and financial industry about the potential, the possibility of a major cyber attack in our financial system?
I don't have to be an insider in that world to know what's going on there.
Mm-hmm.
It's all over the news. They're very concerned about these invasions, and they're extremely concerned about how easy it was for groups or individuals with minimal investment to penetrate these massive private databases. Extremely worried about it. And that's a good thing because, as I said a moment ago, that's spurring them to invest a lot more heavily in defenses. And the key is that the Internet was not designed initially to be open to the masses. The Internet was initially designed for a limited number of very large governmental and university institutions for exchange of data and research. It's a very rarefied, small, elite group of institutions that even had access to the Internet and very low speeds. Now you have, everybody with a cell phone. It's almost, it's almost half the world's population with access to the Internet, and at speeds that are far, far higher than what the State Department or the CIA was taking advantage of, 30 years ago.
Are we going to go to a two-tier internet system, one for government and major corporations and one for the public?
Well, with the new ruling on net neutrality, not right away.
Mm-hmm.
But the point that I'm making is that the internet was not designed for the masses initially, and therefore the security was not the issue. And even when the World Wide Web was launched and it began to expand to the masses, again, it was all about access, and freedom of access, not about security. Security has lagged behind that process by several steps, and now they got to catch up. They know they got to catch up. So I think that from an investment point of view, I think the big opportunity here is with companies that are going to step up and begin to plug those security leaks and plug those holes.
Do you foresee that we're going to go to a biometric system for logging on to the internet?
I think that what you said a moment ago is possibly the way that things are going to wind up, and that is you will have two tiers. You'll have an internet for extremely secure confidential information, and you'll have another kind of internet for just the ordinary business of exchanging email and researching Google searches and so forth.
Dr. Weiss, the asymmetric warfare tactic that troubles me the most is an electromagnetic pulse attack, where an enemy nation simply explodes a nuclear device 300 miles above us in the air, and lights go out, for a century. There's no way to repair anything. That to me is the most terrifying because, we're just dead ducks. We're just sitting here. No electricity, no water, no food, no infrastructure, none of the systems of civilization. Everything's down. It becomes a Mad Max zone. And that's the one that worries me the most. And I have seen.
Well, I understand what you're saying as far as initial shock is concerned, but I don't understand what you're saying in terms of the ability to recover from that.
Well, you can't recover because you have no infrastructure to repair anything. Everything's down. If all of your factories are down, if all of your technology has been immobilized, where are you going to get the electronics? Are you going to buy it from China, and they're the ones that just took you out? That's what I'm saying. I mean, the power generators, the equipment that we would need to rebuild the substations could take 5 to 10 years to manufacture and ship here. I mean, the country could literally be in the dark for 25, 30 years. And by that time, there won't be anybody alive, and your foreign troops will be here gathering up the spoils. But that's the one that really bothers me the most. We're just going to wake up one day and the lights are out. Dr. Weiss, I want to before you go, I want to ask you regarding the BRICS. They are seeking. Well, they're planning to unveil this year their alternative to the World Bank, also the IMF and the SWIFT bank wire system. Is World War III being fought over control of the world's banking system?
The world's banking system is currently has its other issues beyond control or hegemony over the central World Bank type of lending that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that those issues are the primary concern that we should have as investors. And primarily the excessive use of zero interest rates, the excessive use of money printing, the excessive use of debt. All those things are a more serious threat than what's happening in the third, among the BRIC countries.
But if they set up, If they set up an alternative to the World Bank and the IMF and the SWIFT wire, aren't they opening the door for 100 or so countries to join and say, we're leaving the dollar, we're going to join this new system?
They don't have that level. It's one thing to talk about it and to set up small kind of flaking institutions that have that as their mission. It's another thing to actually execute on that plan. And in today's world, it's just not feasible for those small institutions to take over that much control. What is a bigger threat is not what the BRIC countries are trying to do, but what the IMF and the World Bank and central banks all over the world have been doing to themselves. We're our worst enemies. The Fed is its worst enemy. The ECB, the European Central Bank, and the BOJ, the Bank of Japan, they're their worst enemies. They've been shooting themselves in the foot since 2009, and that's after shooting themselves in the foot many times before. Right now they're getting away with it, but as soon or later, they're going to get their payback in the form of just a massive lack of confidence in the currencies that they supposedly are trying to manipulate.
How long can this go on? The quantitative easing Ponzi scheme. How long can this continue?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. It's gone on a lot further and been taken to a much greater extreme than I imagined possible.
Mm-hmm.
If you asked me this question 3 years ago, I would have said, or 2 years ago, I said, there's no way they can continue this without consequences. And here we are 2 or 3 years later. They not only continued, but they've accelerated the pace. The U.S. Federal Reserve is temporarily, throttled down, but in the meantime, the ECB and other major central banks have actually accelerated the process. And that is not going to end well. That's the big threat to the IMF and the World Bank and the central banks of the world, not what the big countries are trying to do.
Well, see, that's where I think the BRICS are getting ready for this crisis. I think they're setting up an alternative system so that when the Western-controlled central banks collapse, when the confidence in them collapses, they have an alternative. That's my view. I think that they're setting up another system, assuming that the world is going to rush to them.
Yeah, we'll have to see how that pans out.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because if the mainstream large central banks are in trouble, they'll be in trouble too.
Hey, one last question before I let you go. What explains the rapid acceleration in the value of the U.S. dollar?
There are 3 factors coming together around the same time. The first is what we talked about in the beginning of this conversation, the threat of conflicts and escalating kind of low-level World War III is helping to drive flight capital from the Middle East, from Europe, from other parts of the world to what is perceived to be the safest markets in the world, and that's the U.S. So that money is rushing into the U.S. dollar. The second reason is you've seen the collapse in the oil prices. That's positive for the U.S. dollar. And third, you have as I said just a moment ago, the European Central Bank and other central banks have been accelerating their money printing machines, whereas the U.S. Fed, at least temporarily, has been throttling back. And so that is driving, they're pumping out the money faster than we are. And that free money has nowhere to go, and it's looking to, it comes to the U.S. dollar as well.
Okay. Well, my guest today, Dr. Martin Weiss, and he is the president and founder of Weiss Research in West Palm Beach, Florida, Florida, and he is the publisher of Money and Markets, the website moneyandmarkets.com, a number of newsletters there. Dr. Weiss, appreciate you being on True News today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, let's take a break. When I return, Mr. David Morgan, publisher of the Morgan Report, a newsletter on investing in silver, will be here on True News. Don't go away.
You're listening to True News, the End Time Newscast. Rick will return after this announcement.
This is Max McLean. How does God's love change us? Listen to the Bible from Lamentations 3. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for him. The Lord is good to those whose hope is in him, to the one who seeks him. It is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord, for men are not cast off by the Lord forever. Though he brings grief, he will show compassion. So great is his unfailing love. From Lamentations 3. Listen to the Bible. It's great for the soul.
Be able to hear the Word of God today and every day. To hear more, go to radiobible.org.
Welcome back to True News. I'm Rick Wiles. David Stockman, Ronald Reagan's budget director, told Bloomberg News today that the global economy is falling apart. Now, last month he said the world economy had entered the crack-up phase. He predicted we would see desperate actions by the world's central banks, increased market volatility and losses, deflation in industrial and commodity prices, and decreasing demand due to climbing debt levels. Meanwhile, Stephen Englander, G10 foreign exchange chief for Citibank, sent out an alert last Friday observing that the current rise in the value of the U.S. dollar has come about at a faster rate than at any other time since the modern system of currency exchanges came into existence. Is 2015 the year the existing global financial architecture breaks apart? If yes, what will take its place? And how can you protect yourself and ride out the storm and come out on top? Mr. David Morgan is on the telephone to discuss these issues and answer these questions. He is the editor and publisher of the Morgan Report, a monthly report that covers economic news, overall financial health of the global economy, currency issues, and the key reasons for investing in precious metals. His website is silver-investor.com. This is David's first time on True News. Mr. Morgan, welcome to the program.
Well, Rick, thanks for having me. I've been a fan. I listen to your show fairly often. I certainly wouldn't say I get them all, but quite often I listen to your show.
Well, thank you. That's an honor. I wasn't aware of that when we invited you. So that means you'll get invited back. Now that I found out you're listening to the program, I'm honored to know that. David, things are extremely volatile right now. I mean, you've got Ronald Reagan's budget director saying the whole thing's breaking apart. We've entered the crack-up phase. You've got Citibank sending out an alert saying, hey, the value of the dollar is climbing faster than any time in history. And we could go down the list of all the other things that are taking place, the plunge in oil prices, the deflation that's gripping much of Europe and other parts of the world. In your estimation, where is the world right now?
Well, I don't have a lot to add, Rick. Where we are is extreme volatility implies extreme uncertainty. And the human species strives to be in a place of safety. In other words, we all strive for something tangible that's real that you can rely on. And money actually is one of those things that people like to rely on, the idea being of financial independence, for example. So when you have currency markets being very volatile, you have bond markets, all these markets, what they're shouting clearly is that we don't know which direction to go. And as you pointed out, the dollar hitting a 12-year high here very recently versus all other currencies, if you use the dollar index. That isn't a big surprise to me, because the certainty that investors or people in general are seeking is safety. And the perception, and it's an incorrect perception, is that the safest place to be is the U.S. dollar. So there's a lot of people that are liquidating whatever investments they have, or it could be stocks, could be bonds, could be whatever, or just they're moving their savings from a certain currency to another one. That's the mass majority of the move. So I'm getting out of the ruble, I'm getting into the dollar, I'm getting out of the euro, I'm getting into the dollar, I'm getting out of all these currencies, I'm moving to the dollar. That, Rick, is the last step before the run to gold, because the safety is perceived to be the almighty U.S. dollar, and that market clearly shows that to be the case. And I won't argue with the market. I never do. I try never do.
Would you say that it's not so much that the dollar is increasing in value as it is other currencies are plummeting in value, and the dollar is the last resort? That's where everybody's going as the other currencies are falling, and the dollar will be the last one that falls. Is that basically what you're saying?
It is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And so and then of course, people chase markets. Most people aren't early. Most people are late. So they see the dollar, it's up over 100 on the index, and that's the place to be. So they love to follow. Well, my neighbor did it, 3 weeks ago, so I'm going to do it now. Yeah, dollar. So it gets overvalued. But what people don't understand, and history bears this out again and again and again, is that any fiat currency, the dollar included, will fail. And just to back up and give some background on the failure rate of the dollar, if you look at the foundation of the Federal Reserve in 1913 and today in 2015, and you use the Federal Reserve Board's own criteria, in other words, on their website, they will tell you that 100 cents in 1913 is today worth 4 cents. So now what we're arguing about is not the 96% loss that's taken place in roughly 100 years of the U.S. dollar, but it's the strongest one out there relative to all other currencies. So bear that in mind, and then ask yourself the question, now we're asking ourselves to worry about the last 4 cents, which we should be concerned with. But the point being is that the vast majority of the debasement of the currency has already taken place behind us. 96% of it is behind us. So now we have to find out where we're going to go. Well, people pour into the dollar as the vestige of last resort. I call it the banker's last hope. And then what happens is, as it starts to deteriorate, people will run to gold. They'll run to the ultimate currency, which has been that way ad infinitum. But the lesson is that most people don't learn that lesson. And so when the dollar starts to break, there'll be a max exodus out of the dollar. But the gold and silver markets are so small that to put a paper price on them when this takes place is impossible to do. I mean, there's ways to do it. We could talk about that. But the idea being that this is the main question I'm getting. I'm glad you started the show with it, because people say, well, how can the dollar be so strong? It's actually fitting what's called the Exeter Pyramid, which is from John Exeter, which is a New York banker that worked with the Fed, a very smart man, considered to be a gold bug, and he drew out the liquidity pyramid, which is an upside-down pyramid, talking about all the trashy, horrible type of investments that are high risk. As people seek safety, it comes down that upside-down pyramid, and the tip of the pyramid is gold and silver, and that is where people go as the last resort for true safety. But only 1% really of the population understand the role of honest money. Most of the other people believe the government propaganda that the dollar is the safest place to be.
David, I didn't understand this until about a year ago, and the light came on for me one day interviewing Jim Willey. And Jim said, because, I said something about the crash of the dollar, and he said, Rick, the dollar's not going to crash. It's going to soar. He said, it's going to soar in value. And I said, well, then what's going to happen? He said, it's not going to crash. It's going to be replaced. It's going to soar so fast, so high, that the world will have to eliminate it, replace it. It's going to cause such imbalances in the world system, they will have to replace it. Do you see something like that taking place?
Well, certainly I don't rule it out. And secondly, just for the record, Jim and I are pretty close, and I read his stuff, and I don't know if he reads mine or not anymore. But no, he's a very good thinker, and that certainly could be the case. But the point is not lost, and the point is that the volatility is there and the uncertainty is there, and that just reinforces that point. If that's the direction it goes, then it builds on the case that there's so much volatility and uncertainty that we don't know what to do now. The dollar's worth this much. We have to do something. See, the bankers are going to try their best to stabilize the system, and they probably already have plan A, B, and C in place. But as you and I both know, the large and in charge person isn't human. And so they may have plan A, B, and C, but it may not be implemented as easily as they take for granted. Well, time will tell on that.
Do you think the central banks have any bullets left in their revolver? Or have they shot them all?
No, I don't. I mean, the only bullets they have is to continue to debase the currency, which was what the Eurozone is doing currently, and they play games back and forth saying that, they've stopped QE in the United States, which is balderdash, but
they outsourced it.
They let another. No, they outsource it to Europe or Japan, or even in Belgium, for example, buying this quantity of U.S. bonds that is so far beyond their GDP, it's ridiculous. So we know where that came from. But the point being, again, that no, they don't have a way out other than what I'll call quote unquote controlled crash, meaning that they're probably already set with another currency. Maybe it'll go to the Amero, or maybe it won't. Maybe it'll go to the Globo. I think on this one, Jim Rickers is probably correct, and the next one would be the SDR, the special drawing rights that are already in place. I'm not in favor of that personally, but certainly I don't have a lot to say, in the banking system other than my views against it. But
David, if they go with the IMF special drawing rights, is that a decision that's made by the West, or is that a decision that will require the participation and acceptance of China and Russia?
Well, that's the best question you can ask, and the answer is I'm not certain, but it would be Western dominated. And yet the most important thing I put out on my briefing for Reuters this week was that the United Kingdom has said that they are going to be one of the initial members in this counter World Bank to the current IMF World Bank.
Yeah, and the United States got really upset about it.
Well, they should be, because it's always been the Anglo-American Empire. In my study, and I'm not saying I'm 100% right, but the idea is correct, the Anglo-American Empire basically comes out of London. It's a London Wall Street buddy-buddy system that's been controlling the global empire from a monetary aspect for a very, very long time. And so for now, the UK to come and say, hey, we're going to go with the BRICS, so they're playing both sides against the middle here.
Are you saying that the Rothschilds would do something like that?
I'm saying that they are self-serving to the maximum, and they'll do whatever they think is in their interest, and they could care less. They're globalists, as you well know, Rick, and I know it's a bit of a rhetorical question.
Well, London has also announced that they will become, at least it's their goal, to become the Sharia finance capital of the world.
Sure. As long as they have control of the money. I mean, as the quote is famously attributed to Mayor Rothschild, I care not who makes the laws, give me control of the money, and I care not who makes the laws. So if they have control of the money, so they don't want to lose that. So again, playing both sides against the middle, it's like, oh, well, we'll be with this other bank, and we'll do Sharia law banking, and we'll do whatever it takes because we want to be the number one banking entity on the planet. That's what it boils down to, from my very studied perspective.
But what this means, I mean, if Great Britain is lining up with this new system, then America's strongest ally has double-crossed us.
I would say, yes.
So are you saying that the rest of the world realizes the dollar is done, is finished?
Well, not yet, but that's the direction we've been moving for quite some time. I know your other guests that you've had on the show, and I know, I don't listen to every show, as I said, but I know that most of your listeners have the background that, people have been exiting the dollar for quite some time. I mean, Saddam Hussein said we're going to go to euro for oil payment, and of course he's gone. And then in North Africa, the gold dinar was going to be used for oil payment.
Yeah, Gaddafi, he's gone too. But now it's Putin. They're after Putin.
Yeah. So anyone that tries to exert I call it again the Anglo-American Empire or the dollar supremacy, usually pays the price.
Well, I've often said the U.S. dollar isn't backed by anything but by the Pentagon. I mean, it's our military that backs the U.S. dollar.
Oil and military or the military, sure.
Right.
I agree.
So, okay, let's talk about what's happening in Ukraine. Is the showdown between the United States and Russia over Ukraine, is it about territory or is it about control of the financial system of the world?
I don't know. I'm not the best geopolitician out there. Of course, I have to look at it in my work, and I do it more from a currency perspective. But you ask my opinion, I'll tell you, I think it's more about warm port going into the Mediterranean. If they don't have plus the the geography is just something that is a line that somebody drew on a map. I mean, if you look at what the people around that port are mostly Russian and sympathetic to Russia. So when they voted, I mean, this idea that the West has that, we are democratic, and all this, and then if they have a vote and then it takes place and then they don't honor it. I mean, these things are just ridiculous, but yet they are real and they're very concerning. So my idea there, Rick, is that I don't think that plays a lot in the currency side of things, but I think it's very important to watch it and certainly could be a trigger point. I'm not trying to make light of it in any way, shape, or form. What I'm trying to say is I think it's bigger than where it starts. It's started, and if it starts there or Syria or Iran or any of the other problems that we have globally, I'm focusing on all of them, and I'm not smart enough to know exactly, where that match is lit. But I think it's already been lit, and it will continue, and it will continue to burn, and it will continue to take in more and more of these countries surrounding it.
Well, the reason I'm asking, David, is because of the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. They have announced that the new World Bank, called the New Development Bank, is going to compete with the World Bank. It will be operating by September or October of this year. They're going to have a new bank wire system set up. They're going to have a new IMF system set up. They're moving quickly to bring out into the existence a new financial architecture. And once that's operating, a lot of other nations that maybe privately don't like America and are fed up with America's assertiveness is simply going to switch allegiance. And once that happens, you lose 100 countries, suddenly switch over to another financial system. Where does that leave the United States and the dollar?
Well said, Rick. And where does it leave it? It leaves it going down. It leaves it with no one there. And once, if the UK definitely opts out, which they certainly have the ability to do based on what they're putting in the public domain, then all of a sudden the mighty dollar is turned around. Or, as you said before, maybe Jim Willey's right, and it soars, and we have to do something with it. Like, we can't have this currency in this mode, so we're going to have to change it or whatever. But certainly, you're right, and I wanted to just add on to what we talked about, moving away from the dollar. There's been so many trade agreements with the BRICS where they go currency to currency and circumvent the dollar altogether. I mean, you have trade agreements with Australia and China. You've got trade agreements with China and Russia. You've got trade agreements with Brazil and China that are just currency to currency and circumvent the dollar altogether. So nobody's been whacked in those cases. It's just continuing to move away from the U.S. dollar, and as you just outlined so eloquently, it's going to be formalized here, where there's going to be a competitor. Wow, what a concept, a competitor in the currency markets that will probably put the dollar in its final phase.
David, once the world begins to exit the dollar and they move to gold and silver en masse, is there enough physical gold and silver on the planet right now that's marketable? I'm not talking about what's buried in the ground. Is there enough gold and silver to supply the demand?
That's a tough question. I mean, the price is supposed to mitigate whatever the demand is. So the answer, technically is yes. So the price would just be the mechanism where you control that. But I want to go a step further, Rick, and really delve into that question. I believe, very similar to what Greg Hunter has advocated for quite some time, which is at some point you'll either have it or you won't, meaning that people that want to buy it in size, meaning like the Sprott Asset Management, the Zurich Continental Bank, whomever, I mean, people that are large hedge funds, large money managers, ETFs, those type of things, won't be able to get it in size. So that's my answer. I think that you will not be able to see large transactions. In other words, China, for example, continues their insatiable appetite for physical gold, and they put in an order for, let's say, double or triple what they normally buy in a month, and it can't be filled. That day, in my view, is coming. So the answer really is no.
Okay, so if China puts in orders for thousands of tons of gold and they can't get their order filled, then the guy on the street that's trying to buy 20 coins certainly isn't going to get his or her order filled.
Well, that might happen, Rick. I mean, in that case, someone might say, well, I've got to pay off my mortgage or I want to buy a truck or whatever. So they might change it for fiat. If I'm getting, $3,000 a coin for gold and it's just gone from, $2,000 a week before and I've got debt due, so there'll be some transactions. But as far as getting it in size, no, and also in certain areas, I think you'll be able to go into like a coin shop and say, hey, I want to buy some silver, and they'll say, fine. What rare coin do you want? Oh, I don't want rare coins. I want a silver bar. Oh, you've got about a 10-week back order. We're not sure we can get it. The waiting list is over there. Put your name on it. That type of thing.
If there is a global shift in the economic system and the world exits the dollar and goes to a new system, paint a picture for what life is like here in the USA in a post-dollar world.
Well, if you could take a road trip with me as a thought experiment and go through some of the poorer sections of larger towns like Detroit as an example, you're going to see this country as a whole move into more and more of a third world type of status. And I'm pretty world traveled, Rick, as you know. And so usually in these other countries, you have gated communities and beautiful gardens and beautiful homes and private security, and then everybody else. And that's the direction we'll be moving, Rick. There'll be the haves and the have-nots. There will be no middle class. The middle class is being wiped out, and it's going to be completely destroyed, and you're either going to be one or the other. Of course, there'll be some in the middle, but that, as an example, is the direction. So get ready that this land of plenty, this land of overconsumption, this land of almost too much of everything, supersized beyond every aspect of our lives, that is going to be a distant past in the, say, next decade or so.
Is silver a better buy than gold? And if yes, why?
It is because it is, well, both are good buys. Both are near the cost of production. But silver is the people's money, and it's a much smaller market than gold. So when things really get rocking and rolling into the precious metals again, gold will get to such a high price that the average person can't afford it. So gold goes to 3,000, 4,000. It's a number different for everybody. But once it gets back into the thousands, meaning 2, 3, 4,000, then silver will be whatever it is, 40, 50, 60, 100. People will be able to afford 100 or 50 or whatever a lot easier than they can afford 2,000. So that's what happened last time in the bull market. And this time, I believe it'll happen even in a greater degree because it's not going to be a U.S. exclusive market this time. It's going to be a global phenomenon. And once right now there's about 1% of the population that buys gold or silver in any form, counting mining shares or ETFs or any form you want to count. So for another 1% of the population to wake up, in other words, 2% of the global population to wake up to the gold and silver honest money story of why it's important, would be a doubling of demand, but it's still only 2% out of 100%. And that's all it will take to put these metals into the stratosphere.
Coins or bars, which is preferable to own?
Coins for almost everybody. I mean, unless you're a big investor, bars are okay, but I really stress coins at the beginning because they're fungible, and it's, if you have a 100-ounce bar, 100 coins, what's better for you? Obviously 100 coins, because you spend a few at a time, whereas with the one bar, you got to make one decision. You've got to be right.
David, you have a book called The Silver Manifesto, and this explains the history of silver and the dynamics of the silver market. If our listeners would like to get a copy of it, how can they reach you to get this?
It's very easy. It's on Amazon, and we're probably going to give Amazon an exclusive on it. So just go to Amazon and type in The Silver Manifesto or Silver Manifesto. It'll pop up. If you're outside of the U.S., Canada, Australia, or the United Kingdom, there's a notation on the Amazon website that tells you to go to the website, and anyone can do this, thesilvermanifesto.com, and you get a blurb from the book. You get to see what it looks like. You can read a chapter and a half, I think, is on there. We're going to have an audio file up as well. So if you're just curious, you go to the thesilvermanifesto.com website. If you want to purchase it, you can go direct to Amazon, or you can go on the website and be directed to Amazon if that's what you want to do. All
right. Our guest, Mr. David Morgan, and he's the editor and publisher of the Morgan Report, the website silver-investor.com. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Rick.
There are approximately 2 minutes remaining in today's program, and a lot of news on my desk I'd like to discuss. I'm very concerned about what is happening in Russia. We're not getting the full story. Putin resurfaced today following his mysterious 11-day disappearance. And what was the first thing he did today? He ordered a snap nationwide combat readiness drill. He placed the Northern Fleet on full combat readiness alert. Over the weekend, there were many unusual pieces of information seeping out of Russia, such as the photographs of a truck convoy going through Red Square, army tanks in front of City Hall, a Twitter tweet that all Russian diplomats departed the London embassy, and a message to reporters to stand by for a big announcement. Furthermore, the United States closed its embassy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, the U.S. Army plans to send a convoy of armored Stryker vehicles on an 1,100-mile road show through 6 European countries to show solidarity to allies regarding Ukraine and Crimea. Now, each side is flexing their muscles. I must respectfully disagree with Dr. Weiss. I believe we are on the verge of a great war. Perhaps he's correct that nuclear weapons won't be used, but I'm concerned that what may be used will be top secret scalar weapons never used in previous battles. In April 2012, Mr. Putin said Russia had been testing mind-bending psychotronic weapons that can turn humans into walking zombies by attacking the victim's central nervous system. Those aren't Mr. Putin's exact words, but that's basically what he was hinting was under development. He said the top secret radiation weapons are, when compared with existing nuclear weapons, more acceptable in terms of political and military ideology. In other words, there won't be the radiation that destroys the land for centuries. They're going to use weapons that take out human beings and lets everything else stand. Directed energy weapons, geophysical weapons, psychotronic weapons, all part of the Russian battlefield plan. All I can say is, come quickly, Lord Jesus. Come for your people.